Welcome to the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast with Tony Stabile and Steve Rockamaniac.
There's a rowdy crowd today.
Hey now everybody, welcome to the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast here on rowdywrestling.net. I'm Tony Stabile. Steve Rockmaniac, Old Man Rockmaniac, will be joining us in just a few moments. First, we do got to thank our lovely sponsors, those badasses over at heelsandfaces.com. Their mission in life is to make you look freaking sweet as a pro wrestling fan with their amazing custom pro wrestling inspired designs, shirts and apparel. You got pants. Ladies, you got yoga pants. I mean, seriously, already, if you're a pro wrestling fan and you're a girl, you're kind of hot. If you're wearing yoga pants as a pro wrestling fan kind of girl, yeah, that's a good life. So go check them out, pro wrestling inspired clothing, heelsandfaces.com. Use the promo code ROWDY, R-O-W-D-Y, all in capital letters, at checkout and save 10% off your total order. Now, enough with the plugs as we have a jam-packed episode. Last night's WWE Fastlane pay-per-view, or as I called it, Sunday Night Raw, took place, and Steve and I are going to go deep into that. And also, Steve has a bunch of news with what's going on in TNA, or as they now want to be known as, Global Force Impact Wrestling, maybe. So, Steve, how you feeling, brother?
Hey now, everybody. How am I feeling? Boy, oh boy, am I burnt. This past week has been pure insanity, not only in the wrestling world, in the UFC world, everywhere. It's been a lot of news. Pretty much since last Monday's episode, when we broke down the departure of the Hardy Boys from TNA, we pretty much have had a nonstop wild ride since then, as numerous other names departing TNA, as well as some of those names who have left finding new places to work, and those not being the WWE. And of course, we had the whole drama of UFC 209, but I covered that more on Twitter. Obviously, we're more focused on the wrestling part here on the show. But then we have Fastlane Sunday Night Raw that had some lowlights, a lot of lowlights, but a few highlights and some interesting developments heading towards WrestleMania. So to say the least, my phone battery is burnt because I think I've uncharged it and charged it a million times this past week with all the news that's been going on. I've been on Twitter, it seems 24/7 almost. And, and likewise myself, and I'm sure yourself, Tony, we've had a busy week and we got a lot to talk about.
Well, before we get into that, I want to wish you a very happy 43rd birthday.
Not actually 43, but sometimes feel it.
So, yeah, this past Sunday, so anybody want to throw some nudes at Steve on Twitter, go right ahead, at Rockmaniac00.
Or female in heels and faces yoga pants.
Yeah, that too. You'll
will also be acceptable. Yes.
Amazing. All right, so, yeah, let's really get into it. Sunday night, I mean, it's one of those things where I understand why they have these pay-per-views or Sunday night events. I'm going to call them Sunday night events at this point. Once a month, you need to do it, and especially, heading into this time of year, you're going to capitalize it. You're going to get the casuals, and, more and more casuals watch throughout this time of year. But I'm a big fan of maybe you should just do TV between Royal Rumble and WrestleMania. And I know we had we had a small version of this discussion at the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view review, where you're like, well, no, you kind of need the Elimination Chamber because what are you going to do for the other show's title? And I'm like, why not just have a personal feud for the title at that point? But that's what I'm saying here, as we get these pay-per-views where WWE makes the stupid decision to not even hide how long their main event's going to be, and we end up with two completely random filler matches that take up over 25 minutes worth of television in the middle of the show.
Although I don't disagree that last night's pay-per-view was very similar to a weekly edition of Monday Night Raw, I think the best idea actually is that make the road to WrestleMania dual branded. Have the Elimination Chamber, which could be an important pay-per-view in setting up WrestleMania's card, whether it be because, the other brand who didn't win the Royal Rumble needs to get something done on pay-per-view, or you just want to, get a couple of other pay-per-view matchups in there so that you could fully develop, the feud for WrestleMania. I think that would probably actually be the better decision for the WWE right now. And that's not to say, because we've said that here on the show that, the brand only pay-per-views have, for more or less, and for discussion's sake, been more than acceptable to date. I think Fastlane was the first time that we come out of a pay-per-view and we say to ourselves, wow, that was just a weekly television show that is going to be blown out of the water, not only by last week's SmackDown, but probably tomorrow night's SmackDown as well.
You're right. Okay. So, and just to put it out there in a small correction of myself, it's only been 2 years now. We have a March event. Before then, as we know, WWE did the long, slow burn into Mania coming out of Elimination Chamber or whatever the Février, because I'm French, February pay-per-view would have been at that time. So let's look into it. WWE Fastlane, beginning of the line. We started out the night. Forget the pre-show. I don't care about that. I mean, nobody was watching it, and especially if you look at the numbers, nobody does. We started out the night with Samoa Joe defeating Sami Zayn in just under 10 minutes. I think it was a really great back and forth match. I was a little sad that they didn't get a little bit more time because they really only got 10 minutes, which is something you'd probably get, at the 10 o'clock hour on Monday Night Raw anyways. And I'm not upset that it was a 50-50 match. But very, very happy here. Super happy that Joe got a decisive win here, making him look strong, at least going into Mania, depending on what he's going to do.
I definitely agree with you that this matchup, was, and it seems to be the consensus from what I saw last night on Twitter, that this was a very enjoyable match. And I think this was one of the mistakes that they did last night in not giving this matchup more time. People were highly enjoying, the back and forth, the domination of Samoa Joe, the comeback by Sami Zayn. Basically, they put the entire, story of, domination, comeback, attempt comeback, stop the comeback, and they did that whole story, but they condensed it into a 10-minute match. And pretty much, and I agreed with, some of the thoughts being shared, that this match probably could have gotten another 5 or 10 minutes. You would have had a great opener instead of a good opener. You would have had a great opener. People would have been excited. And I think people were all clamoring for more from these two guys. And you didn't necessarily need to give as much time as you did to, those quote unquote bonus matches that, I don't think anyone really enjoyed for the most part. And so I think that was one of the mistakes they made in booking last night. But beyond that, it was a good match. I agree with you. I enjoyed the opener.
Yep, so then we move on over to the Raw Tag Team Championship match. The champions Luke Gallows and Carl Anderson defeating Enzo Amore and Big Cass. Another match just shy of 10 minutes. This was fine. I'll be honest, I never really got into it, and Raw and WWE have done a really great job of neutering Gallows and Anderson for me. And especially I'm proponent and huge mark of the Bullet Club. I've been a fan of Carl Anderson since 2005. So for me to come out here and just be like, yeah, it was a match and there's nothing to it. I'm not excited when they come out on the TV anymore. I'll be honest, I don't even remember this match with the exception of, I think they, I forget who it was on, but Big Cass and Enzo did the rocket launcher, but whoever was on the ground, I think it was Gallows, was so close to the corner. I mean, there was very little launching. It was just Enzo jumping up as high as he could to make it seem like it was far.
Yeah, basically Gallows kind of pulled Enzo off there. And, I think we've talked about this in recent months. The state of the tag team division in the WWE leaves something to be desired. We're big fans of the Bullet Club, absolutely. And people seem to start to be burning out now on Enzo Amore and Big Cass just a little bit. And so, this was definitely an example of, a TV style matchup, a TV, level matchup that didn't necessarily, have huge reactions to. They continue the feud as, Enzo's foot was on the ropes. Gallows shoved the foot back in on the finish. The ref didn't see it. So Bullet Club get the win. They get the pin. They could probably continue this maybe on the WrestleMania pre-show, and they basically have established that for Mania, and since the New Day is going to be the hosts anyways, they don't have to get involved in the tag team title picture. So hey, it was TV level matchup, but it got the job done, and probably what they need towards WrestleMania.
And speaking of feet or hands on the ropes, Sasha Banks versus Nia Jax.
Oh boy.
Okay, the match itself, not offensive. Typical Sasha Banks versus Nia Jax. I mean, we've seen it before. We're going to see it again. Very clunky. Nia clearly not ready. It's still not ready to be on the main roster, in my opinion. But the finish of the match, you had Sasha doing an O'Connor roll to Nia Jax, and she went back and did the I guess the bridge with her hands, and I guess there was a screw up here because I think she was supposed to hold on to the ropes to get the pin, but the entire 3 count, she had her hands on the ground, and one of her hands was kind of floating there, I guess trying to find the rope, and the 3 count had happened, and then she finally found the rope and just pulled herself out, and I'm like, ooh, that does not look right. That does not look right.
Unfortunately, one of many botches that will probably be fodder for Botchamania very soon. And also, Nia Jax was the first of 3 competitors last night, and I found this an interesting point. 3 competitors who, coming into this pay-per-view, had an undefeated streak going on pay-per-view. And they made it a point to say it. Like, they made it a point to make sure that all 3 people were announced as that, and so it was kind of like, well, okay, what, it's wrestling in 2017. It's like, oh, okay, well, we can't keep you undefeated. I mean, Goldberg did that in the mid 90s. So the new thing in 2017 is that you have a pay-per-view undefeated streak apparently.
But here's the stupid part: why the fuck are you killing the streak, especially 3 streaks on a pay-per-view with Goldberg, the real streak? Why are you ending him at all on that pay-per-view before your biggest show of the year, when you can at least go back in the history books and say, oh yeah, WrestleMania 30, this streak ended, or whatever WrestleMania we're going to be at. Instead, it's, oh yeah, that random pay-per-view in March in like 2017, right? Like, they're not even going to talk about it. It becomes a moot point. It becomes a stupid thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm trying to say. It's like wrestling in 2017 has become that. This was the match, if I'm not mistaken, that was announced as a submission match.
Yeah, and I never... You had mentioned it. It's like, hey, how did this end in a pin if it was a submission match? And I think at one point I heard the announcer say, oh no, this is, falls to a finish, so it can be submission or a pinfall. So I think there was an error there, and JoJo didn't get the corrected intro card.
Yeah, that's it, because I had heard JoJo clearly say this is a submission match, and I didn't catch the announcers saying some sort of correction to say that it can end via pinfall. So there obviously a miscue somewhere, and it probably would have been better if they actually had the submission match, because I mean that sequence was pretty good. People were enjoying it. I guess they thought they didn't necessarily want to make
which
either
one's
one
worse?
look bad.
Well, which one's worse? Pinning, and you can kind of retroactively go back and show the pin from another angle, and then the very last second, Sasha holding onto the ropes, pulling herself out, and saying, oh, Sasha had her hand on the ropes, so she pinned the big woman that way. Or your big woman cleanly tapping out in the middle of the ring like she did versus Becky Lynch.
Oh yeah, don't get me wrong. I mean, that was the point I was about to get to. The submission would have weakened Nia Jax more than anything. That's probably why they changed that actual stipulation. But I did find it weird. It caught me off guard. I was like, what? Okay. And so at that point, I was kind of like, okay, well, somebody screwed up somewhere. But it was a pretty decent little matchup. Nia Jax loses her streak, but at the same time, I guess with Sasha possibly going into the 3-way at WrestleMania, or maybe a 4-way for that matter, I guess they decided just to try to make the two look as equal as possible. So it was what it was.
Which then led into a very weird thing is earlier on in the night, Jinder Mahal and Rusev had an argument in front of Foley saying, we're done, we're not going to team up anymore. And Foley, I don't know, they had the best of 7 joke, and then it just led to both guys coming out and arguing who would have their match first. Bonus match, as you put it. Jinder Mahal beat up Rusev, which is stupid. Stupid beyond all hell. And then Mahal proceeded to do something that was truly amazing and made a Cesaro match completely boring. It really felt like Cesaro had to realize right away that he's like, oh, I'm facing a guy who really sucks, and he's kind of big, so I can't really toss him around as much as I'd like. So I'm going to go from a 10, and I'm going to slow down to about a 6, and I think he'll be able to keep up from there.
Yeah, and Foley had teased like a best of 7 almost as a joke between Mahal and Rusev earlier in the night, and we were like, oh my God, no.
Well, the wink and a nod, naturally.
Yes, but so instead he gives them separate matchups, and steroids Mahal,
Hard body Mahal, come on, get it right. And handsome Rusev.
Yeah, well, ask Mark Hunt, but anyways. There was a lot of talk about that on Twitter, and not much more to say about that.
Listen, just because you're vascular and your body type changed in like a month, doesn't mean you're on steroids, right?
Right. The match was, technically, it was all right.
It wasn't
no one
bad,
cared.
but why? But A, no one cared, and B, why the hell do you have a random unannounced match on a show that does not generate a pop? Like, you can't sit there and tell me that in the afternoon they're like, oh man, we got to really stretch this pay-per-view out. You know what we're going to do? We're going to put Jinder Mahal versus Cesaro in the middle of that. That'll really pop them. No! And this is coming from a Cesaro fan. The position that they were in and the match that they had was not designed. I'm totally fine with like impromptu matches or impromptu things. Like a couple of years ago, more than a decade I should say, when Scott Steiner debuted for WWE, they threw out Matt Hardy and Chris Nowinski to insult the crowd. Out comes Scott Steiner for a huge pop. He beat the fuck out of them for 8 minutes and then walked away. That was a randomness in the middle of a pay-per-view that got a pop, and I'm totally fine with that. This and the subsequent Big Show versus Rusev, 0 pop, 0 buy. And then we had Big Show defeating Rusev in the better of the two matches, in my opinion, and that's only because Rusev, extremely charismatic, kind of fun. So they had, big man-ish style match here. Rusev at one point hits 3 Machka kicks on Big Show, tries to pin him, he kicks out, and just wonderfully, Rusev sits up and he goes, 3 Machka kick, 3 Machka kick, no! All right, I'm really bad, I'm sorry, guys. And then Rusev proceeded to give him 3 choke slams, set him up on the corner, bottom turnbuckle, and, like, Old Yeller style, just punched him in the face, like murdering Rusev. We witnessed a murder.
Yes, we did, and the crowd obviously made this like a USA Russia thing or wherever the hell, Bulgaria, whatever it is, and not much to say. It was TV matches. This, was unfortunate. You mentioned it off the top of your rant, that, WWE putting these pay-per-view matches on the show, and then, it basically at this point, everyone was like, oh crap, Kevin Owens is going to lose in less than a minute, because that's basically, they were just giving it away at this point by adding these 2 matchups, giving them 8 minutes, 9 minutes each match, and so, it kind of became obvious, and people kind of zoned out, and I myself included. So, Big Show gets the over, and it looks like as if Big Show's not going to get Shaq at WrestleMania because Shaq's out of shape and not caring. So, Big Show kind of lost once again in the shuffle.
Yeah, well, there's a couple things they could do. They could just put it back in the Andre the Giant Battle Royal and then have him win. I don't know. Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens with him. But this is where I feel the pay-per-view kind of took a turn for the positive at this point, as we had Neville, who's been a shining light or a jewel or the diamond in the rough, or as he calls himself, the king of the cruiserweights, for the past couple of weeks, just on point, and WWE, fully behind Jack Gallagher as a legitimate contender. And these guys had an amazing match, and finally doing something different than what the other cruiserweights were doing in the division, which was what I called 205 light. WWE telling, I guess WWE producers and agents telling them, do what you do, except do it our way. Which makes them 3 minutes. Exactly.
And we'll change the ropes, tape and everything will look good.
In their defense, tonight's 205 cruiserweight championship match where Neville defended against Rich Swann went through 2 commercial breaks.
Oh boy.
2 freaking commercial breaks. Anyways, so that being said, I thought this was a really great match. I love Gallagher. They did the quarter of the spot where he does the handstand, and normally he does like the one stop with his foot, like with the guy's charging, and he goes, "No, wait," then put his foot up, and the guy tries to go again, and then he put down his other foot, like, "No, we're serious." Like, I thought that was really cool. Gallagher's headbutts are always really sweet, but then in comes Neville, who just hit really hard, and then actually hit the red arrow. I think maybe the first time since he turned heel, and picks up the win.
Yeah, this was actually, reminiscent of some of the, very good matchups that we had on the Cruiserweight Classic series. I mean, they actually got some time. They got some chance to, tell a story. Gallagher was bumping his ass off.
Working.
I mean, some of those. Oh yeah, he was working his ass off, and I mean, some of those bumps, man. Oh boy, they looked dangerous as hell, but he gave it his all in this matchup, and I mean, in many ways, this was probably the matchup of the night for me. It's a toss up, but I think I lean that way just because it was at this point, as you kind of mentioned, the pay-per-view starts to take its upturn, and I think people really got into this, especially coming off of those 2 bonus matches that we didn't necessarily care about. So I thought it was very well done, very well placed, and good job to both those guys.
Yeah, the crowd was finally wanting to get behind something, which led us into what I think kind of killed the crowd. And, this is coming from a gimmick that I enjoy and hate at the same time. And this is really the only thing between matches we're going to talk about. New Day came out for some shenanigans. They're going to be the hosts of WrestleMania, so get ready for about 2 hours of them over a 7-hour show. They came out with an ice cream cart, and Big E, the gimmick was that he was high or drunk?
I think he was sipping on something, so therefore he was drunk.
I'm not cool like the kids, so some of the slang they were using, I'm kind of like had to look up on an Urban Dictionary.
Sipping on gin and juice, you never heard of that, no?
No,
okay.
I heard them say slizzer at one point.
Oh, okay. I heard sipping, unless they said dripping. I think Big E had spent the weekend with Bisping.
That might be it.
Yeah.
Which then led into match of the night for me, which feels kind of weird to say considering it's Roman Reigns defeating Braun Strowman just shy of 20 minutes. I mean, I don't think either guy looked worse going into this. The only reason why I feel Braun should have won is, you mentioned it earlier, had the undefeated streak going. So to have Braun go ahead and lose at this point, this close to WrestleMania, I mean, a couple of the ideas that were thrown around, a lot of speculation was, well, what you're going to have here is Braun beat Roman Reigns due to Undertaker's interference. Have the gong and thunder distract, Roman Reigns, and Braun just kill him at the end of the match or something like that. But then people were like, well, no, because you're pretty much going to have the exact same thing in the Goldberg versus Kevin Owens match. And my thing to have this similar finishes was, one, you're going to have an actual match. The other one, you're going to have exactly what we got, which was spear, jackhammer, victory sort of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, even I think the reactions that I was seeing was maybe 60-40 agreeing with you, but I kind of fall into the 40 in that Strowman actually, still looked good in this matchup.
Oh yeah, he did.
He did some things that he has never done before. I think he impressed some people as he opened up his style a little bit. So even though he lost to Roman Reigns and did lose clean, I don't think it hurt him as much as some people think it did because he lost clean to Roman Reigns. And Roman Reigns' shoes, by the way.
Well, I was about to say MVP of the night.
Yes, huge thing.
Did he forget his boots?
Well, he may have forgotten his boots. They might have gotten lost in luggage. He might have damaged them the night before. But the MVP of the night is either Roman Reigns' shoes or the guy who had Jack Tunney is not my president sign.
No. I also liked fake news.
Yes.
I love when wrestling fans get very political.
But yeah, I think Strowman still looked decent in this matchup. I think they did a good job. They gave it some time, and I applaud the booking of the matchup. So it's for me, it's between this and the cruiserweight match that would have got matchup of the night, and I'm not gonna bitch at all of the fact that Roman Reigns won this match.
Oh, and it has to be noted, my friend who came watch the show, Bateman, he wanted it to be known to the world. His MVP of the night was Charlie Caruso's boobs.
Ah, okay. Also shout out to the cameraman who was following around Charlotte's ass in the ring, accidentally getting caught. Kevin Dunn switching to that feed and be like, "Oh crap, shut it off." He was probably fuming. It was hilarious.
Because if anything, Kevin Dunn would have rathered fall around Ric Flair's ass. Just saying. All right, let's move on over to the Raw Women's Championship match. Bayley defeating Charlotte, 16 minutes and 50 seconds to be exact. This was weird because the baby faces screwed over the heels as Charlotte comes out with Dana, but sent Dana to the back. Like, she's going to do this by herself. And then towards the end of the match, after a couple of botched spotches, I can't even... That's how botched it was. I'm screwing up my review of it. Between Bayley and Charlotte in the corner. Anyways, we get to the finish of the match where the girls are on the outside and out comes Sasha Banks. And my one and only thing I have here is, did Sasha ever actually hit Charlotte, or did Charlotte hit Sasha and then Sasha ran away? Because you can logically get away without the DQ finish, because if Sasha touched her, I mean, right away that should be a DQ finish, and that's how I thought they were going to go with this. But no DQ, nothing was called. And when Charlotte had Bayley had her feet on the ropes, so Sasha jumps up on the apron. No, she's got her feet on the ropes. So the ref stops the count, and then Bayley hits the belly to Bayley, pin 1, 2, 3. But like, this was complete screw job on the babyface side, right?
Yeah, I mean, the majority definitely agrees with you, because like most people were calling for a DQ in this matchup. But I guess the story here, Charlotte says, no, you know what, Dana, go into the back. I don't need you. And of course that backfires on her because she didn't have backup at ringside ultimately when Sasha Banks comes out and costs, her the match through the
one now.
But
I feel more sympathy
I
for
saw
Charlotte.
somebody. Yeah, I saw somebody asking about this on Twitter. Basically the same question, in the sense that isn't Bayley the underdog face that eventually gets up there and wins the match, as opposed to relying on her friend who is cheating for her. And I said, I was about to say, well, I guess if Bayley wants to turn heel eventually, she could turn on Sasha for having helped her when she didn't want or need that help.
Oh God, no. Face Sasha's the worst.
But at the same time, I think they're just randomly trying to figure out a way to put these three women together, and they thought this was the best process to do so. And so it wasn't necessarily the best of booking. I think, unfortunately, the botches in this matchup took away from a lot, of the enjoyment. Bayley, basically, it's unfortunate she put in such a performance when you would expect so much more out of these two girls, especially in the semi-main event. So it's unfortunate that they went down that path, but if it does, because I mean, the problem is that a lot of people say Bayley should eventually turn heel and it'll be great, because after all that face run, it'll be like, oh my God, and the girls will be crying, and and she'll like shove it in their face. She could probably get that girl who's always been a mark of hers, and she'd probably like rip the tassels off her. It'd be great, but they need to do a longer run of face Bayley in WWE level, main event roster level, before you could do that. So if that's the long-term booking plan, then I don't necessarily disagree with that. But when we were talking about Bayley's potential on the main roster last year and her potential debut after WrestleMania, it was kind of like, well, listen, there's on a slightly different level, there's a possibility of her being the female John Cena. She'll sell merch like crazy,
but
she's going to be
sell
over.
merch like crazy.
Well, yes, but I'm not saying she doesn't. But what I'm saying is she's going to sell merch like crazy. She's going to be over as a face, but don't do it too fast in terms of her heel turn. Everybody's clamoring for John Cena's heel turn now, and it's been forever. But you can't do that right away with Bayley within 1 year. She's had the NXT run, yes, but you can't do that on the main event roster. So it is leaving some confusion here and some question marks as to, what is this, long-term distance planning here. But I guess we'll see at WrestleMania. They might do a 3-way. They might do a 4-way. I guess more likely a 4-way now with the Sasha Nia Jax thing. So we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah. Well, so then that brings us to the main event of the night. Universal Championship match. Goldberg defeating Kevin Owens in 22 seconds. Spear, jackhammer, pin. The entire match summed up very beautifully in about 2 sentences. Kevin Owens powdered to the outside a couple of times to taunt the crowd and supposedly play mental games with Goldberg. Eventually, he runs in the ring and says, "No, now I'm ready. Ring the bell." And as he yells that, Jericho's music hits. The bell rings. He gets a spear. He gets the jackhammer, and that was it. Goldberg, 50-year-old Goldberg, is your main champion. I'm going to call it World Heavyweight Champion. Forget Universal thing for a moment. In the year of 2017.
Well, I said it, before we get into the actual thoughts of what they decided to do. I said it, just before the main event happened. I said if Hulk Hogan can win the title in 2002, then I guess Goldberg can win it in 2017. Basically Hulk Hogan had no, business winning that title at that age in 2002, but he did. And yeah, he was, it might be a slightly different situation. You could probably debate this for a long period of time and compare it. But, the hope was throughout the night that, can't we just get a Brock Lesnar run in? Can't we just get a little Brock Lesnar run in? Don't let Kevin Owens lose this way. And, I mean, coming out of it, I could say that I'm happy that they didn't make him job clean. If they didn't make them job clean in a minute or 2 minutes or less than a minute, whatever the amount of time would it have been, then I would have been upset. But Owens plays his mind games, thinks he's going to outsmart him. Jericho comes in. He costs him the match, basically. I have no problem with it. I just don't. As a guy who has probably a bias towards Kevin Owens because of our, past of you and I, Tony, in the IWS and so on and so forth. I even though I have a bias for him, I don't hate what played out last night on the show. I mean, it would, because at WrestleMania, does Owens go over? Does Jericho go over? You don't know, but most likely with Jericho leaving, you'd think that maybe Owens gets an over here and gets that U.S. title off him. But it would not have hurt, or let me throw the question towards you. If they had not given Goldberg the title and you just had Goldberg versus Lesnar at WrestleMania, would that have hurt the matchup without the title?
Going into WrestleMania and WrestleMania itself, no. Goldberg, Brock Lesnar, you build it off the big rematch of what happened at Survivor Series. You build it off the rematch of what happened at WrestleMania many, many years ago. And you also have Paul Heyman there cutting the promos for them, much like happened tonight on Raw when Goldberg was almost CM Punk chanted out of the building because they're in Chicago of all freaking places.
Of course.
History book-wise, I think WWE isn't booking this match to get people to go to WrestleMania because WrestleMania is sold out. Was sold out long before they announced this match. They want to be able to tell the story. We had Goldberg versus Brock Lesnar in a WrestleMania main event for the title. That's what they want to be able to say. They want to be able to look back at from WrestleMania 40. They want to look back from WrestleMania 50. God forbid we make it to WrestleMania 60 and so on and so forth. They want to be able to look back at this WrestleMania and go, that was a main event. Because on paper, from 2004, on paper from this year, and on paper from 20 years from now, that is a lineage main event. more so than Kevin Owens versus Chris Jericho. And I mean that with the most respect and love in my heart for both of those men. And furthermore, we've seen it where Chris Jericho, they have faith in him not to be the main event, but to be a good hand. So one of the best feuds going into WrestleMania a couple years ago was CM Punk versus Chris Jericho. Where were they on the card? Really early. And that's what's going to happen to Kevin Owens and Chris Jericho. It's probably going to be a far, far better match, more entertaining than what we're going to get in the main event. But on paper, Vince McMahon is thinking about, let's look at that. Let's get that Hulk Hogan versus Ultimate Warrior status of a match. And that's what you're going to get, and you are going to get it.
I think it's more that let's avoid the same mistake we made at WrestleMania 20. I mean, these two guys, okay.
WWE made no mistake. It was the guys who made the mistake. It was Austin on his way out, Goldberg on his way out, and Brock Lesnar on his way out. So all three men weren't in to do business. That's all it was.
Well,
on paper,
they put it on pay-per-view, and they put it on pay-per-view as one of the main matches. So
regardless whether they have the title on them or not at this point, because both men are sticking around and both men realize I'd rather continue making the easy money in WWE than test the waters on the outside, they're going to do business. So whether it's for the title or not, I don't think it's a WWE mistake back then or a mistake now. It was the individuals back then.
Well, I think we know the fact that these guys are going to be part-timers, if Goldberg resigns for that matter, okay? So because that's unknown at this point. But, the reports say it's leaning towards that he would, at least do a little bit more part-time with the company. But I think if without the title, you know that these guys are going to be part-time, and I think the match means zilch at that point. At least this is for the title now, and you know that one way or another, whoever wins has to, stay in the picture. So they can't necessarily repeat the same thing they did all those years ago where the crowd then takes a dump on them. Jericho and go ahead.
I was about to say, well, if you look at when Lesnar won the title the last time, he won it at SummerSlam and disappeared till Survivor Series. You had no champion on TV. You had no champion on house shows. So regardless, it's going to happen either way.
All right, it'll be interesting to see what the reaction is at WrestleMania. But ultimately Goldberg won last night, but I'm not gonna necessarily go on a rant saying how bad that of a decision that was in regards to Kevin Owens. I don't think Kevin Owens is going to suffer a huge setback because of this. So I won't rant about that. And, when we look back on Fastlane, a few moments that were pay-per-view worthy, but a lot of television level worthiness, and probably amongst the first brand only pay-per-views that didn't necessarily live up to, a pay-per-view.
All right, and then on that note, I'm just going to ask you very quickly, at the same time that you did yesterday, as I know how much you love big polls, you threw up on the Tweety box, asking the fans what were their thoughts on Fastlane. 20% said thumbs up, 22% said thumbs in the middle, and a resounding 58% went out of their way to say thumbs down. For me, it was strictly a thumbs in the middle kind of show. What about you?
Yeah, because we had a couple of good matches, we had that Cruiserweight match, because we had the Roman Reigns Braun Strowman match, and despite what you want to say about the booking of the main event, it gets enough to be in the middle as opposed to being completely down. I haven't checked the results recently in regards to the WWE, because WWE always does one, and usually when it's like massive downward trending, they take it off. And they put it up last night, and when I saw it at first, it was leaning as thumbs down as well. So it's that seems to be the consensus coming out of Fastlane last night.
Yeah, so let's move on over to some news. We touched on it last week, the big changes in TNA. The first things that were happening, the Hardys decided to take their ball and go home, a la Stone Cold. Not really, because Matt wanted to play ball and at least give them the titles back. They decided, no, you know what? We got the titles right now. you're gone, you're done, you're finished, go do whatever you want to do. Lo and behold, Friday night, where did they end up?
Well, Ring of Honor was in New York City, and yes, surprisingly, as we're, as I'm following and getting into the UFC pay-per-view event, and all of a sudden pops up that the Hardys are not only at Ring of Honor, but as well they won the tag team titles, defeating the Young Bucks, who, of course, they've been, basically promoting or harassing, depending on what word you want to use, for the past, 6 months or so. That, oh, we're coming after you, and that it was a huge surprise, to say the least, because they went on to continue to say that they have signed with Ring of Honor. Now, at this point, the length of their contract is still unknown, and whether or not it's going to be something long term or short term, and to allow them to eventually get the WrestleMania or WWE for that matter, is to be seen. They did put up some tweets saying, "Oh, we're coming after you, Gallows and Anderson next," but they obviously they've been doing this for 6 months. In those tweets, threatening to go after other companies' champions, so that I didn't necessarily find to be any sort of indication that they may be leaving at this point. But there are some reports saying that it's a long-term thing. Others are saying it's a short-term thing. It's to be seen, but one thing everyone could agree on is that that was a huge coup for Ring of Honor, because that was the first of two major announcements that night, as the other guy who had left TNA, granted not recently, but had left TNA a while back and left WWE last year, was Bully Ray, who announced that he's now in Ring of Honor. So
and
it
he's
was
there
huge...
long term.
Oh yeah, and so basically, Ring of Honor threw down the gauntlet now to say, hey, TNA is in this moment where you don't know where they're going to go. So we have this opportunity to not only get them, the Hardys, but also Bully Ray. So they went after it. They did it. It's going to be huge for them, to be seen what exactly the terms of these contracts are. But this what capped off what was a very intense week in TNA Wrestling's world. Or now, actually, just to start off with, they no longer are called TNA. They have dropped the TNA name. They changed their logo, and as Tony was quick to point out, their logo starts to look a lot more like Global Force Wrestling now that Jeff Jarrett is of course, back basically running the company. But there was 6 big names that left TNA. We talked about 3 of them last week on the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast. We talked about Drew Gallows. We talked about the Hardys. And then the next day, it started to come out. Maria, Mike Bennett, and Jade all took off from TNA as well. And basically the same story coming out, even though some are being nicer than others in how they explain it. They basically all said negotiations were going downhill, because there basically was radio silence. We, wanted to negotiate a contract, and, basically they were dragging their feet. So the plan was for Drew Galloway to actually win the TNA title at the tapings this past week and get this huge push as a single star. But the contract apparently came to him a bit late. He may or may not have agreed with another contract elsewhere and decided, no, thank you, I'm not going to come. So that left TNA, or Impact Wrestling, as we should now call it, in the lurch, and basically with a big spot and TV already written, and looking for somebody to fill that spot. They contacted Bully Ray. They wanted him back. He almost came back to take that spot and become the TNA World Heavyweight Champion. Ultimately, instead, they got what is probably even, I don't know, it's hard to say if this is a bigger signing or not, but they got Alberto Del Rio to debut for them. So they signed Alberto Del Rio and make a huge debut, make waves across the wrestling world. Then they continue to also then sign up Matt Morgan, Chris Masters. They bring back LAX. Conan joins them. You got also Bruce Pritchard, of course, known from WWE days, Brother Love, but also for his behind-the-scenes work. Did have a run in TNA, and now he is back with the company. And the funniest story of the week is probably revolving around Bruce Pritchard. Because, I mean, of all the things that happened, and we'll touch on some of those polls that we did put up, actually, about the signings. But the funniest story of TNA's week was the fact that apparently Jeff Jarrett contacted Vince Russo and wanted to possibly discuss him coming back into the company. At that point, he said, okay, listen, send me your podcast download numbers and I'll give you a call back. We'll figure something out. So Russo does that. Of course, Russo does have his actually daily podcast. And although recently he has talked a lot less about wrestling because he's just completely burnt out on it, he, does have somewhat of a following. However, Bruce Pritchard, who has probably one of the best podcasts of a professional wrestler or professional, who was in the WWE and TNA, he has the best podcast out there because basically it's a shoot interview each and every week. It's like a 2 to 3 hour shoot interview every week on a different topic, and they've been doing huge numbers and. So much so that 4 days before it was announced that Bruce Pritchard was going back to TNA, they had tweeted out like, "Hey, look, TNA got 265,000 viewers last week, and last week our podcast got like 800,000 downloads." And so he had 4 times as much viewers as TNA. So now the story, if you believe to steal a line from Bruce Pritchard, rumor and innuendo coming out of Vince Russo's side is that he said, well, right after I sent it, I all of a sudden I got radio silence from Jeff Jarrett, and all of a sudden I hear that Bruce Pritchard's being hired back to TNA. So he says, okay, well, it's TNA, or Jeff Jarrett was basically working on, saying, hey, what's going to get us the most potential viewers? And they used the podcast numbers to make a decision to bring back Bruce Pritchard into the company. Now, don't get me wrong, Bruce Pritchard's a huge addition to the office for TNA, and even on TV could add something there. But you wouldn't have thought that that they would have brought him back, or that he would even have accepted that spot. Because if you've heard his story from his first run in TNA, you would say to yourself, "Why on earth would you want to go back to that company?"
Well,
but apparently they're trying
TNA
to
is
run
a perfectly revolving
things now.
door that has no problem with going back to how it looked in 2004.
Yeah,
So I think that's
apparently
what it is, and they surround themselves with people who would.
Yeah. So at this point, they bring him back. They put him as an authority figure on TV. His backstage role is not fully announced here. It might be some sort of contributor or and something along those lines. But it capped off what was a huge week for TNA because they lost all these big names. They added a bunch of big names. Now Tony.
I'd say 2 big names out of everybody.
Yeah. Well, of course, the other ones are just them, popping because they're former WWE guys, right? Chris Masters and Matt Morgan coming back, I didn't necessarily mark for that, but definitely it was interested to see that, Alberto Del Rio was back in the company. And going back to our results, actually, from the poll that we put up, Alberto Del Rio signing with Impact Wrestling, we gave you 3 options. We said, great signing, we got 39%. Bad signing, 17%. But cool, but not a game changer, 44%. So most of the majority did go with, hey, it's a cool signing. It's definitely, I agree. That's the one I would have voted for. It's a big addition to their roster, but it's not something that's going to necessarily say, whoa, it's not CM Punk level for that, for example. That would be a whoa. That would be a game changer. But ultimately, Alberto Del Rio signing is probably not going to be that. And we also put up another one, and then I'll let you, get into your thoughts on all of these shenanigans that happened this past week. We put up another one saying, Jack Swagger, who apparently asked for his release, as he announced on Chael Sonnen's podcast, saying, hey, I'm leaving WWE. I'm done. They never give me a chance. And, WWE kind of dragging their feet on it. They might give him a 3-month no compete clause and then let him go. But he seemingly on his way out. And I was like, well, should Impact go after him? 56% saying hell yeah, 44% saying hell nah, it's all right. But for me, Jack Swagger, it was kind of a pity that the WWE didn't give him a chance, a better chance than they did. I saw some really good matchups. One that comes to mind, him and Kevin Owens on like a C show last year. Like it was main event. It was like those 2 guys, and they had a great match, like better match than I had seen on Raw that week. Or it's like it. And so it was a shame that they kind of let him go to the wayside. And, who knows what his future entails. Maybe it'll be Impact, maybe it'll be other things. But your thoughts, Tony, on this crazy week that was for Impact Wrestling?
Well, I said a little bit earlier, I'm always very cautious when it comes to TNA or Impact Wrestling or whatever, because now, as much as it is a different company because Dixie's out of the way, the guard that was in place for the past 3, 4, 5 years, they're gone. But what do we have in place? We have, Jeff Jarrett, who let it get to this point. Who let Dixie Carter get into power, who let all this sort of thing happen. There was an idea of possibly bringing back Russo, which, why would anybody want to do that at this point is beyond me. And, Bruce Pritchard is back, which, hey, that could be good, that could be bad. He hasn't been involved in such a long time that, hey, okay, it's decent enough to bring him in and all that stuff. And when it comes down to the signings and releasings, a lot of the guys coming in now, those are Jeff Jarrett loyalists. These are guys who he either brought into GFW or, transitioned to GFW when he was ousted from TNA to begin with. So, it's very interesting to see, like, how Jeff Jarrett is a loyal guy in the sense that, you didn't bite the hand that fed you, I'm going to feed you some more. So it's very interesting to see that, and I agree with the people in the sense that Del Rio going in there, Alberto El Patron now, as we should be referring to him permanently, it's not a game-changing move. It's not a CM Punk, but it is, it's going to provide some very fresh matchups that are going to be entertaining, are going to be good, because Del Rio is a fantastic wrestler, period. So very happy with all of that. It's just a sort of situation where I'm always very cautious, and I'm going to remain cautious. So we'll leave it at that for now. Chris, Masters. I mean, what do you want me to say?
Yeah.
What do you want me to
Not
say?
much to say.
So we do want to know from you guys, aside from the Twitter polls, hit us up on Twitter at Rowdy Wrestling, at RockManiac00, at Fortes Stabile. If that's not enough, always hit us up on Reddit now as we drop the shows there and look for discussion. We want to know what you guys think. Hit us up at rowdywrestling@gmail.com. And I think we should leave it at there. Leave it at that, as Steve needs to go get his NyQuil and I believe some... What's old person medicine? I'm running out of jokes.
Yeah, we'll just leave it at that then.
All right, thank you, guys. We're going to be back next week as we're going to have the review of the ROH pay-per-view that's going down this Friday, so stick around for that. Thank you to everybody who's downloading. And once again, let us know what you think. What was the biggest signing Impact Wrestling could have done? Where do you think they're going to go here, Goldberg and Brock Lesnar? Is that the match you want to see in the headline of WrestleMania? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you, Steve. Thanks, everybody, for downloading. Have a week. Thanks for downloading today's episode. If you're new around here and like what you've heard, hit that like button and slap the subscribe one too. Leave me a comment and tell me what you thought, and I'll see all of you next time.